$500 million. That is the sum Iran is estimated to lose every single day the Strait of Hormuz remains blockaded. Not in theoretical terms, not over the arc of a drawn-out conflict, but in the present tense. Today, tomorrow, and every day that follows, as oil cannot move and hard currency dries up at a speed no economy can absorb. On April 22nd, as the world watched a fragile ceasefire extension settle over the region, Iran's government made a move that shattered the illusion of calm. 3 ships attacked, 2 seized, rocket-propelled grenades fired at a Greek cargo vessel that had Iranian permission to cross just hours earlier. And hovering over all of it, a single word sent across social media by the former president of the United States: SOS. The distress signal, the implication that one of the world's most sanctioned, blockaded, and bombarded regimes was on the verge of drowning. But whose signal was it really? And what chain of events did it trigger before the morning was out? The story does not begin with a firefight on the water. It begins with a signal buried in a late-night post where a president described Iran's government as financially collapsing, losing $500 million a day, and sending out a secret plea for rescue. That post did not simply echo American policy. It revealed, in Trump's framing, that Iran itself was communicating desperation through private back channels, a claim that, if true, exposed the public defiance of Tehran as a mask for internal crisis. Hours later, as oil markets lurched and analysts scrambled for clarity, Iranian gunboats moved. The world's most critical shipping artery turned once again into a chessboard where every piece is both a bargaining chip and a target. If questions like this one are the kind you find yourself turning over long after the video ends, you are exactly the audience this work is made for. Subscribing takes 1 second, and it means the next story finds you. And when you are done here, leave a thought in the comments. The conversation that happens there is often the most interesting part. Before the morning of April 22nd, the consensus among Western analysts held that Iran's leverage was fading. U.S. intelligence briefings, now partially declassified, described a government under strain, but not on the brink. Oil prices, after an initial surge, had stabilized just above $95 per barrel. The Friday before, after intense negotiations in Islamabad, the Strait of Hormuz had briefly reopened. Iranian oil tankers made limited crossings. The pattern appeared set, pressure punctuated by brief, reversible concessions. What no one in that room had accounted for was already in motion. The underlying assumption was simple. Iran could not afford to keep the strait closed indefinitely. The loss of $500 million each day was unsustainable for more than a few weeks. The United States, with naval assets positioned across the Gulf, could escalate at will. The ceasefire was supposed to be a circuit breaker, a chance for both sides to recalibrate without sparking a regional implosion. But the logic depended on a crucial variable: that Iran's need for revenue would eventually force a concession. That assumption was wrong. At 8:38 a.m. London time, the UK Maritime Trade Operations Centre reported a vessel under fire 8 nautical miles off the Iranian coast. 12 minutes later, a Greek-owned cargo ship, the Epaminondas, was attacked in the Strait of Hormuz. IRGC gunboats, acting with sudden precision, revoked the ship's prior clearance and struck with both gunfire and RPGs. By 0900, the ship's bridge was shattered, communications disrupted, and the vessel dead in the water. Simultaneously, the MSC Francesca, a container vessel flagged as Israeli-linked by Iranian forces, was ordered to drop anchor, then boarded and seized by IRGC commandos. The third ship, the Euphoria, was targeted and briefly stranded before escaping. By 10:30, 2 ships were in Iranian custody and oil markets were surging. The cost asymmetry could not have been starker. The RPG that crippled the Epaminondas cost less than $1,000. The cargo sitting idle on board is worth over $40 million. Each day the strait remains closed, global oil markets lose over $8 billion in transactional value, while Iran's own economy hemorrhages $500 million in lost revenue. But the logic is not symmetrical. For Tehran, every act of aggression both deepens the pain and raises the price for the United States to hold the line. What looked like a local maritime incident was, in reality, a demonstration of a new legal and strategic architecture. Iran did not simply close the strait. It established a regulatory regime, announcing that ships must receive explicit IRGC authorization to transit. The justification cited, tampering with navigation systems, unauthorized operations, are not the language of military blockade. They are the language of sovereign enforcement. Iran was not just flexing military muscle. It was asserting the right to police an international waterway, to set the rules, and to punish non-compliance at will. The trap had been set weeks earlier. In Islamabad, Iranian negotiators had made regulatory authority over Hormuz a non-negotiable demand. The United States refused, insisting on free passage as a precondition for any deal. The 2 ships seized are not simply casualties. They are leverage embodied, proof that Iran's core demand is not theoretical. It is being enforced in real time. What came next would prove that everything the analysts had assumed about this situation was built on a foundation that was already crumbling. As news of the seizure spread, oil prices spiked above $100 per barrel. Brent crude closed at $101.91, erasing the temporary relief that Friday's reopening had provided. U.S. oil settled at $92.96. The Atlantis II, an Iranian oil tanker, crossed the strait in defiance of the blockade, part of a pattern where Iranian vessels move under special permissions while commercial ships from other nations are left exposed. Only 8 ships transited Hormuz that day, down from the pre-war average of 135. Each missing transit is a data point in the collapse of global shipping confidence. The IRGC's statement, methodical and unapologetic, framed the attacks as enforcement actions under Iranian law. The Greek Ministry of Shipping protested, but could do little as the vessel sat damaged in Iranian custody. The United States, for its part, maintained the blockade and extended the ceasefire at Pakistan's formal request, linking the next phase to a unified Iranian proposal that so far has not materialized. China, watching its own ships navigate under special authorization, warned that the region was at a critical juncture, a signal that even Beijing, Tehran's most durable economic partner, saw the escalation as more than a local skirmish. The window was closing faster than anyone realized. Trump's midnight posts reframed the entire conflict. He revealed, perhaps inadvertently, that Iranian intermediaries had approached him 4 days earlier, asking to reopen the strait immediately. That date, April 18th, coincided with Iran's most public display of defiance. The contradiction could not be sharper. Iran's public posture was uncompromising, but its private message was a plea for relief. Trump's framing of the SOS as Iran's own signal, not his, was a calculated move. It exposed a split within the Iranian system, pragmatists seeking a deal, hardliners enforcing maritime seizures. The question was no longer whether Iran would concede, but which faction truly held the levers of power. That single decision set off a chain of events that most observers still have not fully mapped, and the consequences are still unfolding today. The breaking point arrived in the hours after the ships were seized. The United States gave Iran a new 3 to 5 day ultimatum: negotiate a unified proposal or face renewed bombing. The deadline replaced the previous one, which had replaced the one before that. Each extension is shorter, each ultimatum sharper. For Iran, the daily loss of $500 million is brutal, but in Tehran's calculus, survivable if it leads to permanent regulatory authority over Hormuz. For the United States, the risk is clear. End the blockade without a deal and lose all leverage, or maintain the blockade and risk escalation that drags in China and destabilizes global oil supply. The trap is now visible to all. If Iran concedes, it admits defeat and loses the only leverage it has left. If it escalates, it risks outright collapse. April 22nd will be remembered as the day when the region's fragile equilibrium was irrevocably shattered. The ledger is unforgiving. 2 ships seized, 3 attacked. Oil above $100. Iranian revenue destroyed at a rate that no sanctions regime has ever produced. The Epaminondas, with its bridge shattered by RPG fire, sits as a floating monument to the cost of miscalculation. The Francesca, flagged Israeli-linked, is in Iranian custody, a bargaining chip for negotiations that may never materialize. The Atlantis, too, crosses under Iranian flag, defying the blockade. Chinese diplomats warn of a transition between war and peace. American officials count down a 3 to 5 day clock. The cost is not just in dollars or barrels. It is in the shifting balance of power that will determine who sets the rules for the world's most strategic waterway for the next decade. 54 days after the war began with an assassination and a bombing campaign that stunned the region, the world stands at the edge of a new phase. The SOS that Trump published is not just a message about Iran's financial distress. It is the outward sign of a system under existential pressure, a regime forced to choose between economic collapse and a last-ditch bid for leverage that could reshape oil markets for years. The final act has not yet played. The 3 to 5 day window is open, but closing fast. Somewhere between the private plea for relief and the public seizure of ships, the future of the region is being decided in real time. The question worth sitting with is not whether Iran survives the next week, but what happens to the structure of global power if a government can lose $500 million every day and still dictate the terms of the world's most important shipping lane. Share what you think in the comments. 11709